this is a problem that is global. The fire has already hit us literally with forest fires. The droughts have hit us. There is seminal climate change, working in a sector for decades and people didn't want to hear the truth. Well, the truth is right there. Weather patterns are changing. So we are not prepared for really what we need to do.
Wall Street. It's a name that conjures up images of high-stake finance and billion-dollar trades that shape global economies. But what happens when you take that symbol of capitalism and turn it green? Today, we have the distinct pleasure of hosting a visionary who has been doing exactly that for nearly a quarter of a century, Peter Fusaro, the founder and chair of the Wall Street Green Summit, joins us today on today's episode of Dynamics, bringing his trademark insight and clarity to a world that's constantly evolving at the intersection of climate, capital, and technology. As the summit heads towards its 25th anniversary in 2026, returning to the iconic Corner Club in New York City, it's not just marking a milestone of making a statement. This is the longest running and most respected sustainable finance event on the planet, where clean energy meet investments, where carbon markets are dissected, and where innovation isn't just celebrated but scaled. We are thrilled to have Peter with us to unpack what's next in his space, from ESG, quiet rebranding, to the rise of climate tech as a catalyst for transformation, and what it truly takes to bring Wall Street into alignment of a more sustainable future. It's a pleasure to have you join us today, Peter. We're delighted to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. The Wall Street Green Summit, its 25th anniversary is coming on 2026. This annual event is one of the longest and most popular events on finance for sustainability and particularly sustainable finance event in the world. For those who may not know and be familiar with this summit, what actually inspired you to launch this summit over 2 decades ago?
Yes, it started when a colleague wanted to do a conference on energy efficiency, and I thought that was quite narrow. And so I broadened the first conference into renewable energy and carbon markets. And over the past 25 years, we've evolved into really focusing more on the capital markets, scaling cleaner technologies to mitigate climate change. So what does that mean? We've been the launch site for many new initiatives in solar energy, in fund management, in new ideas in battery storage and technology. So long story short, we only do the event once a year. There are many conferences around the globe, and I'm very happy to see so many people participating in climate change solutions. But I've been at it for 35 years just on that metric alone. And it's taken a long time to get people focused on you can make money doing the right thing, as we say in New York. So right now, we're seeing an upsurge despite all the negativity in the press and government in Washington, D.C. We are seeing an upsurge of interest in investment. For example, last year, $2.1 trillion was deployed in climate energy solutions. That's up 11%. And I foresee it will be up again this year. There's just been a lot of static about government mandates, government monies. The government was never there to really catalyze capital. The private sector in strategic investing, family offices, sovereign wealth funds, they see the future, and the future is green.
Thank you so much. But if you were to look at it, comparing the role of the private sector and the government, how would you rate the level of significance? If at the time that government withdrew its support, you think, and from what you have seen on the Wall Street, that there have been increase in financing, does that mean or conjure in any way that we can do without policy, we can still succeed on just and green transition, despite lack of support from the government, particularly from the policy perspective. So comparing the role of the private sector and the government.
It would be, as a former policymaker, and I've worked in policy, academia, and finance. I've worked in three sectors. It is important that government set mandatory carbon standard, which it has done in California, in the EU, and many other countries. But those are really stationary sources of pollution. They're just being broadened in the EU to mobile source pollution. And that's helpful. But then we have another carbon market, which is the voluntary carbon market, the VCM. And that is growing because there's a lot of corporate demand for climate solutions. And most corporations can't innovate fast enough by 2030 to be carbon neutral. So they will be buying carbon credits. So I'm not saying there isn't a place for government, but this is a problem that is global. The fire has already hit us literally with forest fires. The droughts have hit us. There is seminal climate change, working in a sector for decades and people didn't want to hear the truth. Well, the truth is right there. Weather patterns are changing. So we are not prepared for really what we need to do. So the game really is scaling capital in climate solutions. And the number is quite huge. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, probably one of the best analytical services on the planet, sizes this market at $215 trillion over the next 25 years. As I mentioned before, we deployed $2.1 trillion last year. So we should be deploying $6, $7, $8 trillion globally to really address the climate change problem. That also makes it an opportunity for investors. So my argument is that folks want to do the right thing. They want to have a return on capital. I'm very immersed in the New York City climate tech sector, which is quite huge. People don't realize that. They tend to look at Silicon Valley, but actually climate is very real and seminal in New York City. And many foreign companies are opening New York offices because they see the market in the US is huge. Despite the negativity in policy in DC, the states are moving forward, individuals are moving forward, corporations are moving forward. Corporations are not stupid. They think in 40-year time frames. I'm talking specifically about the energy sector, which I've been involved in for almost 50 years. I'm talking about the airline industry. So they're looking long term. Long term is very different how government thinks. Government thinks very short term election cycles, re-election, getting rules through. It would be wonderful if we could have uniformity, but it doesn't work that way. The better news is we have multinational companies that have a global problem. So that's really the fit. They have to make the energy transition, and they will do that. They have the capital, resources, but it takes time. So right now I'm a baseball fan. We're still on the top of the first inning. We're in the beginning of the transition. It is a huge economic opportunity to create many jobs. That's the thing politicians like, job creation. Solar in the US has created almost 300,000 jobs. So this is a job engine of growth. It doesn't happen quickly, but now I think it is accelerating. There are more funds being formed on climate tech, looking at solutions, but also bringing capital into technology markets.
All right, thank you so much. Now, you raise a very crucial point, which is the role of subnational government. For instance, what the states are doing in the US. Now, but looking at it, do you think that the sustainability as a sector, sustainable, the sector, generally, the environmental sector, do you think we really have a business case as we speak, particularly for private sector? I'm asking about this because the private sector is all about profit. Generally, the basic objective of running to a business oftentimes is the profit. Now, is sustainability already profitable on a business case on its own, at least at this point, from your perspective in the US?
Yes, and let's just call it sustainable finance. Yes, there have been successful exits, either by IPOs or trade sales. That's acquisition by large corporations of new technology. My thesis very simply is that large corporations can't invent the future. They're too big. They have too many employees. They have cross purposes. It's the entrepreneurs in the climate tech sector who are creating the technology that is starting to scale and be acquired by large corporations. So they wouldn't do this if they weren't making a profit. Now, I'm not saying every single climate tech early stage company is going to make it to the promised land, but some will succeed. And what is succeeding? It's revenue generation. It's taking that idea, building the team, and starting to make sales and revenue. And I'm talking revenue, north of $1 million, north of 25 million, perhaps 100 million. It's happening. And we've seen this already occur in the solar sector. Solar prices went down 95% in the last 15 years. It's become affordable all over the world. And that is the game. It's called bending the cost curve. When things initially come into markets, they're very expensive. I'm a big advocate of hydrogen fuel cells, but hydrogen has very little infrastructure, very expensive to make, and we need to get the cost down. Why would I say about hydrogen? Hydrogen has no emissions. It makes water vapor. And so I'm getting at, we need to think a very long-term, but on short-term basis, folks are making money doing the right thing. Companies are very active in the sector. You can call it the energy transition. You can call it climate finance. You can call it carbon markets. To me, they're all one and the same. It's sustainable finance.
Thank you so much. Now, just to wrap up on that before I go to the summit for next year, I wanted to ask, many of the mini grids, for instance, clean energy, that are being used for mini grids in Africa, many of them are not 100% financed on business case, particularly in Africa. Many of them are funded by development partners. And one begins to ask, now, without development financing in terms of grants, what does it take to drive the sector towards full business case? I mean, I just mentioned clean energy, for instance. There can be other, you can look at other sectors. But what does it take? Because you just mentioned now the role of the private sector apart from the government. Things are moving well in the US now on sustainability because of the role of the private sector and the subnational government. Now, that is because, in a way, they're already making some profit. They have been able to drive it on business case. So what does it take to look into a micro sector within the environmental space and drive it to full profitability on a full business case, from your experience?
Well, looking at Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, the major opportunities, you have a lot of people. So there's a lot of opportunity to bring new technologies in. There's also opportunities to do things like microgrids. You don't have to, everything doesn't have to be big. I looked at a gentleman from Uganda who is making these solar lanterns. There's all kinds of opportunities just to bring in to what we call the global south. I think recently there's more focus on this, which is good because we need to lift all the boats. And let's face facts. It's the OECD, the developed countries, that made most of the pollution. It wasn't the developing world that created the 430 parts ppm that we have in the stratosphere today. So there is kind of an obligation, I'll call it. Not everybody feels that way, but I certainly do, having traveled to 50 countries, 3 million miles, seen horrific poverty, but also saw opportunities to leapfrog technologies. I'll give you an example. So many years ago, we had landline phones, but some developing countries moved immediately to cell phone technology. So you can actually go to better technologies. And I think in Africa specifically, there's a tremendous opportunity in microgrids. There's a tremendous opportunity in solar power. And these are affordable. I think looking further, there's a lot of biomass in Africa. So there's opportunities in creating better biomass solutions. There's a lot of interest these days in biochar, which is very much in the agricultural sector. And so I think Africa is actually ripe for more investment. Yes, of course, multinational agencies such as the IMF, World Bank, et cetera, will deploy some capital, but frankly, it's not enough capital. This is like I mentioned, a bigger scale opportunity to, and I hate to use the word, but decarbonize the global economy. In Nigeria, you have NNPC, a major oil and gas producer. There's opportunities there to transition to cleaner energy, and it takes time. I recently met with the former head of Shell New Energies, and we basically looked at the same picture. These things don't happen quick. You need a sustained gain to move forward. You can't, my wife has an expression, don't quit before the miracle. Well, this miracle takes time. If you don't have patient capital and the wherewithal to build companies and solutions, you're not going to make it. You're going to fail. I'll give you an example. I'm on the board of a reversible fuel cell company in Ohio. NASA funded them to make water on the moon. I'm not making that up. And they had no revenue, and they kept plugging away. It was a chemical engineer and a small team from Ohio State University. And yet, because they were driven, 7 years later, they raised $17 million last year. They're starting to be used in the marine transport industry, something nobody thought about at the time. So what I'm getting at, this is not an easy lift. If it was simple, then everybody would do it. This is actually a heavier lift. You have to think about technology risk. You have to think about financial risk. You have to think about return on investment. But turn it all on its head, this is the greatest business opportunity we've ever seen for humankind. No one's ever thought about $215 trillion opportunity. That's the size of the market. You're talking about energy, food, and water. Energy is an $8 trillion business. Food's a $5 trillion business. Water is a $3 trillion business. This is a major opportunity for people to be involved everywhere in the world. And the good news is the technology comes from everywhere. No one has the entire license on all technologies that are green, sustainable. I think a lot of young people come out with really new ideas from universities, from think tanks, from labs. So we're seeing a lot of innovation now starting to turn into climate change and climate tech solutions.
Thank you so much for the elaborate discourse. I'm tempted to go in the direction of environmental justice because you touch a lot on that, particularly looking at the voluntary nature of international agreement and treaties around the climate and environmental issues. But maybe that will be a topic for another day. Let me ask you, so let's go to the summit for next year. You're opening the session, the summit with a session on climate tech today. Why the focus on climate tech? And how does it kind of give an overall perspective or at least the burden of the summit?
Honest, I've had to de-emphasize ESG for obvious reasons. So I've really moved more into climate tech investing and the energy transition for next year. And the good news about climate tech, there's probably 30 different subsectors here. There's ag tech, there's battery storage, there's biochar, there is clean energy in the form of renewables across the board, solar, wind, geothermal. So what we do, we kick it off with, here's the big picture. This is what's going on. It's very interesting. I mentor a lot of young people. I've mentored over 300 young people in the last 25 years because I believe very firmly we needed more knowledge capital in the sector. And I've always told the young people, do what you like to do. You can't pay for enthusiasm. So I actually think there's a lot of passion, mission-based investing, we'll call it, a real opportunity to do the right thing, make the world a better place. And people used to laugh at me when I talked this way 30 years ago. They don't laugh at me anymore. So I think there's a real goodness in humankind to want to help out and raise all the boats.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Now, there is going to be one of the sessions, one of the major emphases of the summit, the Green Summit next year, is also on the carbon market. And of course, it seems you kind of like to raise debates, and then so that there could be discussions, and arguments, Now, So there are a lot of concerns around the world, particularly in developing countries, on the carbon credit because sort of there is one side of it that seems fantastic. There's another side of it that looks like it's a permission to pollute. And then you look at what is happening now that corporations, big polluters in the global north are coming to the global south to buy lands that could have been used for economic. These are countries and nations that still have social and economic problems, still trying to grow the economy. And then you're buying the land in those economies only to plant trees. I mean, of course, trees is fantastic. Planting trees is very fantastic and it's crucial, but in a way, competing with economic interests. What are your thoughts about this, generally?
Well, I'm a big advocate of carbon finance. I've worked all over the world. I've worked on projects under the Kyoto Protocol. I helped implement AB 32, the climate change law in California. I've been involved in the EU ETS, emissions trading scheme. Those are mandatory markets. Okay, it's a little different. So mandatory markets says you can pollute, but then you have to start reducing your carbon footprint. That's really how mandatory markets work. So there's a fixed number, and over 10-year time periods, they reduce the pollution. That's very easy. It's monitored, it's verified. The bigger market opportunity, which is the smaller market now, is the voluntary carbon market. So my own thinking is major corporations around the world, and some of them are active in 80 to 100 countries, cannot be carbon neutral by 2030. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with buying carbon credits, either carbon reduction credits or tree planting. I worked with a company in Peru that took distressed land using biotechnology for farmers to basically create the value, increase the value of the land, and then sell the carbon credits to Amazon. I don't see anything wrong with major corporations spending money buying carbon credits because they're bringing money into the local economy. And that's really important. But as I said, this is a bigger opportunity. So the global voluntary market right now is not very big, but it's going to grow pretty significantly in the next 25 years. Most of us look at this as the next market.
All right, thank you so much. Now, the summit has a lot of themes. You've defined a lot of themes for the summit in terms of clean energy, carbon market, clean tech, and the likes of them. All of these have potential to cause some disruptions within the system, within the sector and the value chain entirely. But which of these themes you think is at the fulcrum, at the pivots of the transition that we're looking at in terms of impact? Which is likely going to cause the biggest change if we're going to invest money? If there's a private sector that wants to invest, which area will give probably the best impact, the biggest impact?
I don't look at it that way. Okay. We have 40 experts sharing their knowledge. So there's not one silver bullet. My most popular session has always been the last session, which is the funds. What's the fund strategy? What's private equity doing? What's venture capital doing? What are family offices doing? What are NGOs doing, et cetera? However, I don't have a one size fits all. I bring in many experts. It's really practitioners, people with technology coming to share their knowledge and expertise and get financed. That's the game. And then they want to scale. So it's really a business development conference. It's a convening of once a year. 9,000 people have come to this thing. I've downsized. It's only 150 people now in New York. It's a good manageable size for people to do business. But I don't have one solution. I mean, we've had a lot of interest in battery storage. Last year, I had someone talk about battery storage arbitrage. We've had a lot of interest in the biochar markets, and that's growing by leaps and bounds, and that's really touches the agricultural sector, as I mentioned before. But I don't have one thing. I think there's some interesting outliers like geothermal. I think there's some interesting outliers like electric airplanes. I think some things are not the big market, but they are maybe a new market. And the game, very simply, globally, is how do we reduce this 38 billion ton carbon footprint? And if we didn't have trees and oceans, it would be 52 billion ton, because that's the amount of carbon that's emitted by fossil energy every year. So I'm just trying to bring forward, and we've been successful at this, bring forward new ideas, new thinking, that you can do this, but everybody's different. I mean, we've had a lot of interest in forestry, in biotech and forestry, in using new ideas in regenerative agriculture. This year we had something on eco fashion. I thought that would be fun, bring something a little different. So it's not one thing. Like it's like whatever turns you on, and everybody is not turned on by the same thing. So that's why it's a very eclectic mix of smart people. And that's what I convene. And then I let them do their thing. They get their homework assignment from me, but then they just do their thing. Everybody gets their 20 minutes of fame. They speak for 10, 12 minutes and their Q&A. In 20 minutes, you can't tell your story, then you shouldn't be there. And we have a joke, called the elevator pitch. So this is a little expanded from the elevator pitch. But what's been successful is that there's a momentum after the event. The people become friends, they do business. One of my interns got a job at my summit this year, unbeknownst to me. Thought that was great. She's working for an Australian fund now. It's just, I don't even know what's going on in the room because I just convened an event with all these smart people who are very passionate. And an investment banking friend of mine, couldn't believe how friendly everybody is. The one key denominator of this climate tech sector is everybody's friendly. People want to help each other. Senior people will talk to younger people and mentor them. And there's a sharing of knowledge. I think that's a really good thing.
Great. Thank you so much. And you already answered one of the key questions I wanted to ask you, why we try to round up. And that's looking back, what has been the impact of the summit altogether. It's been 25 years. 25 years is a whole lifetime, actually, particularly when we talk about from career perspective. So if you want to add to that, particularly on what has been the greatest impact that touched your heart most, that you hold very dear about the conference in the past about the summit in the past 25 years, you can stay hard. And I add to that, which may likely be my last question, hopefully, is to know about the future. You have to look backwards, at least from modeling perspective. You have been in this sector, handling a big event like this, sustained it over 25 years. You've hosted thousands of people for the past 25 years. You've hosted people from different industry, different sector, representing different interests with different outcomes, answering different questions. Now, I think you stand in a good position to give us an idea of what has happened in the past 25 years. And then, based on that insights, you might be able to provide some insights, or foresight rather, into what do you see the sector, what do you see about just and green transition happening perhaps in the next 10 years, perhaps in the next 25 years? Maybe.
Well, the most gratifying thing has been my interns. My interns who attended the summit have gone on to greater things. One is the co-head of the World Bank's Disruptive Technology Fund. Another has created a forestry fund. He left BlackRock and he's now been doing that, repurposing forest lands around the US and Latin America. Another one went from summit to a private equity. So I've actually been very fortunate to have really talented interns who have gone on to greater things. They've gone beyond their teacher, which is fantastic. I was a professor at Columbia University, renewable energy project finance, second-year grad students. So I'm very dedicated to the next generation of knowledge. This is the world for young people. This is not my world. I'm almost 75. This is the world for young people to contribute, to lift all the boats, to create new technologies, to get better jobs, to help others. Because I've just seen this happen. That's been the magic in the room. Okay? It hasn't been that this company was acquired and that fund has done really well. That's happened. SJF Ventures came to my conference. They're one of the most successful funds on the planet for impact investing. They're now in their 25th plus year, and they didn't start out not making mistakes like everybody else. And they started out as the Social Jobs Fund, and they are now the biggest impact investor fund on the planet. And one of their theses is to create jobs in the community. I think it's very important, you mentioned social justice, to not just reduce pollution, but also create jobs for people. Because that's a very simple metric. If people have a job, they feel good about themselves. And that's a really important value. And I see in this sector a lot of people helping others. I know that sounds very corny. I'm that guy in New York, who's the green guy in New York. But I see this, and I've been all over the world, and I've lectured at 20 universities, MIT, Yale, Wharton, University of Chicago, you name it, I've been there, London Business School, Oxford. I see it everywhere. The good news is we have academia creating sustainability colleges, specifically the last several years, Oxford and Stanford, which I've worked with both. My game is very simple. Get people motivated to put the time and effort to solve the world's biggest problem. This problem does not track election cycles. This problem is an invisible pollution, CO2. And so we have a problem that is so big that it challenges everybody. And you don't have to have one answer. So I'm actually quite pleased this sector has turned, I've worked in ag tech, and I'm not an agrarian economist. I've worked in climate tech from batteries. I've worked in solar. I've worked in so many parts of transportation. I worked on the Prius with Toyota 28 years ago. Let's date myself. So I think going forward, all technology sits there, but it's the young people in the incubators, accelerators, in the universities, colleges around the world that are going to get the job done.
Thank you very much, Peter Fusaro, for this very insightful session, sharing your experience over the past 25 years, organizing such a very fantastic the Wall Street Green Summit in the United States, and also sharing your foresight into the future, also emphasizing the key role, the essential role of the young people in defining the future of sustainability that we all aspire to see on this planet Earth in our own time. Thank you so much. And with this, we'll come to the end of this edition of Gringo Dynamics. I remain Adedoyin Adeleke from Gringo TV. Thank you.
It's a pleasure doing this. Thank you.